The old mansion sits atop Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga, Tennessee, like a mourner hunched over a grave. For generations, tourists have admired its elegant Victorian architecture, never suspecting the nightmare that sleeps beneath its foundation. What I'm about to tell you has been deliberately erased from historical records, buried in forgotten archives, and dismissed as mere folklore. But make no mistake, the events that unfolded at Ravencrest Manor in 1891 are as real as the mountain it stands upon. Before you continue watching, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments. Have you ever encountered a place that felt inherently wrong? A location that made your skin crawl without explanation? Because after hearing this story, you'll understand why some places deserve their sinister reputation. In the winter of 1891, as America's Gilded Age glittered with the fortunes of industrial titans, Thomas Blackwood was adding the final touches to what would become the most notorious private residence in eastern Tennessee. Ravencrest Manor stood as a testament to wealth accumulated through methods that even the most ruthless robber barons found distasteful. While Carnegie built steel empires and Rockefeller dominated oil, Blackwood made his fortune through means so dark that financial papers of the era carefully avoided detailing the sources of his seemingly limitless wealth. Standing 6'4" with a shock of prematurely white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to cut through whoever they beheld, Blackwood had arrived in Chattanooga in 1880 with nothing but a leather satchel and a letter of introduction to the city's most influential banker. Within 5 years, he controlled a significant portion of Tennessee's mining operations, several banks, and enough political influence to ensure that his activities remained beyond scrutiny. What distinguished Blackwood from his wealthy contemporaries wasn't just his meteoric rise or his reclusive nature. It was his obsession with certain architectural elements that made the construction of Ravencrest Manor a subject of whispered conversations throughout the region. The mansion's foundation had been excavated to an unusual depth, nearly 30 feet below the mountain's surface. Local laborers who participated in the initial phase of construction spoke of strange symbols carved into the bedrock and unusual artifacts unearthed during excavation, only to be quickly confiscated by Blackwood himself. But most disturbing of all were the children. Between 1886 and 1891, as Ravencrest neared completion, 23 children vanished from Chattanooga and surrounding communities. The disappearances followed no discernible pattern except for their timing. Each child went missing during the new moon, when darkness was at its most complete. Local authorities investigated half-heartedly, unwilling to confront the city's most powerful resident. Newspaper reports carefully avoided suggesting any connection to Blackwood or his construction project. But among the laborers who worked on the mansion, rumors spread about sounds coming from beneath the earth at night, sounds that no human throat should be capable of producing. By December 1891, when Blackwood announced a grand gala to celebrate the mansion's completion, he had transformed himself from mysterious outsider to the unofficial king of Chattanooga society. The city's elite clamored for invitations, conveniently forgetting their earlier suspicions. After all, wealth had a way of whitewashing even the darkest rumors. The gala, scheduled for the winter solstice, December 21st, the longest night of the year, would feature entertainment brought from New York, exotic foods imported from Europe, and the unveiling of what Blackwood cryptically referred to as the Heart of Ravencrest. 200 of Tennessee's most prominent citizens received invitations embossed with a strange symbol, a labyrinth surrounding a single watching eye. Elizabeth Montgomery, the 19-year-old daughter of Judge William Montgomery, regarded the invitation with unusual apprehension. Unlike her social climbing peers, Elizabeth had maintained a healthy suspicion of Thomas Blackwood from his first appearance in Chattanooga society. Her intuition, often dismissed by her father as female hysteria, had been sharpened by her mother's Cherokee heritage, a connection that the judge had worked diligently to obscure as he climbed the social ladder. "There's something wrong with him, father," Elizabeth insisted as their carriage approached the illuminated mansion on the evening of the gala. "His eyes. They never reflect light correctly." "Nonsense," Judge Montgomery replied without looking up from his pocket watch. "Blackwood represents the future of Tennessee. His connections to the Morgan banking interests alone make him valuable to us." Elizabeth fell silent, knowing further objections would be futile. At 19, with chestnut hair that fell in natural waves to her waist and eyes the color of Tennessee whiskey, she had become accustomed to men dismissing her concerns while admiring her appearance. Her education at Wellesley College, fought for against her father's initial opposition, had only increased her sense of alienation from Chattanooga society. As their carriage joined the procession of vehicles winding up Lookout Mountain, Elizabeth studied Ravencrest's silhouette against the night sky. While ostensibly designed in the fashionable Queen Anne style, something about its proportions seemed subtly wrong, as if the architect had worked from flawed mathematical principles. Windows appeared slightly too narrow, ceilings a fraction too high, and the entire eastern wing seemed to bend at an angle that violated geometric logic. "The man spent over $4 million on this monstrosity," her father remarked, finally looking up at the mansion. "They say the foundation alone required 20,000 tons of Tennessee granite." "Why would anyone need a foundation that deep?" Elizabeth asked, her unease growing as they approached the main entrance. "Progress requires solid footing," her father replied with the confidence of someone repeating a phrase they've heard but not examined. The interior of Ravencrest defied expectation. While the exterior suggested Victorian opulence, the main hall displayed influences far older and more diverse. Elizabeth noted Egyptian motifs alongside Babylonian imagery, medieval European symbols intermingled with patterns that appeared Native American in origin. The overall effect was disorienting, as if Blackwood had attempted to incorporate every mystical tradition known to humanity under one roof. Thomas Blackwood himself greeted each guest at the entrance to the grand ballroom, a space large enough to accommodate a full orchestra and 200 dancers with room to spare. When Elizabeth reached him, his ice-blue eyes seemed to focus on her with unsettling intensity. "Miss Montgomery," he said, taking her gloved hand in his. "Your presence particularly honors us tonight." Elizabeth noticed his use of us, despite no visible companion, but more disturbing was the temperature of his hand through her glove, cold as January marble. "The honor is mine, Mr. Blackwood," she replied automatically, withdrawing her hand as quickly as propriety allowed. "Your home is unprecedented." A smile flickered across his face, revealing teeth that seemed too uniform, too perfect. "Indeed. Ravencrest represents the culmination of work begun by my ancestors centuries ago. Tonight, that work reaches its conclusion." Before she could inquire about this cryptic statement, Elizabeth was ushered forward by the press of guests behind her. As she moved into the ballroom, she noticed something odd about the floor beneath her feet. The marble appeared to be veined with metal in patterns that formed what looked like writing in a language she couldn't identify. The evening proceeded with the expected elements of Gilded Age extravagance, a 12-piece orchestra playing Strauss waltzes, French champagne flowing like water, oysters from the Chesapeake Bay served on ice sculptures. Yet beneath the conventional opulence, Elizabeth sensed something building, a tension in the air like the moments before a devastating storm. At precisely 11 o'clock, Blackwood ascended a small platform at the head of the ballroom and raised his hands for silence. The orchestra fell quiet, and the assembled guests turned expectantly toward their host. "Distinguished friends," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space. "You stand tonight not merely in a mansion, but at the threshold of a new age. For centuries, my family has searched for this place, the exact geographical location where the boundaries between worlds grow thin." Polite confusion rippled through the crowd. This was not the typical speech about architectural achievements or gratitude to contractors one expected at such an event. "Lookout Mountain is special," Blackwood continued, seeming not to notice the guests' discomfort. "The Cherokee knew it. The Spanish explorers sensed it. Even your American Civil War generals recognized its strategic importance, though they misunderstood the true nature of its power." Elizabeth glanced at her father, who appeared as bewildered as the other guests. This was quickly departing from acceptable social discourse. "Beneath this mansion," Blackwood said, his voice lowering to a near whisper that somehow remained audible, "lies a system of caves older than human civilization. The native tribes considered them sacred. The early settlers feared them. My family has sought them for generations." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Elizabeth noticed frost forming on the champagne glasses. "Tonight, as the sun reaches its lowest point in the annual cycle, I invite you to witness the fulfillment of my family's purpose. The opening of the forgotten chambers." With these words, Blackwood pressed his hand against a panel in the wall behind him. A low rumbling shook the floor, and to the astonishment of the guests, the entire center of the ballroom began to retract, revealing a circular staircase spiraling down into darkness. Gasps of surprise turned to nervous laughter. Many assumed this was merely theatrical entertainment. Perhaps Blackwood had engaged some elaborate mechanical marvel like those displayed at World's Fairs. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood announced, "I invite you to descend. What awaits below will transform your understanding of our world and your place within it. Curiosity overcame apprehension as the society figures, emboldened by alcohol and unwilling to appear cowardly before their peers, began to approach the staircase. Elizabeth remained rooted in place, her instincts screaming warnings that her rational mind struggled to articulate. "Father, we should leave," she whispered urgently, gripping the judge's arm. "This isn't right." Judge Montgomery patted her hand dismissively. "It's merely a novelty, my dear. Probably some geological formation he's turned into a grotto. These nouveau riche types love their spectacles." As her father joined the procession descending the staircase, Elizabeth found herself torn between her fear and her unwillingness to be separated from him. After a moment's hesitation, she followed, staying close to the wall as they spiraled downward. The staircase descended far deeper than seemed possible, going well beyond what would have been considered the foundation. Elizabeth counted more than 300 steps before they finally reached a vast underground chamber that defied all expectation. The space was easily 3 times the size of the ballroom above, its ceiling supported by columns carved directly from the living rock of the mountain. But it wasn't the scale that struck Elizabeth speechless, it was the evidence of antiquity. The walls were covered with carvings that predated any known civilization in North America, depicting entities that resembled humans only in their possession of limbs and heads. Most disturbing of all was the central feature of the chamber, an enormous circular pit, perhaps 50 feet in diameter, its edge surrounded by 23 small alcoves carved into the stone floor. Each alcove contained what appeared to be a child-sized sarcophagus, their lids decorated with the same watching eye symbol that had adorned the invitations. The assembled guests fell into a stunned silence as they took in the impossible space. Some began to back toward the staircase, social propriety forgotten in the face of mounting dread. But before anyone could retreat, a grinding sound echoed through the chamber as the stone staircase retracted into the ceiling, sealing them below. "My friends," Blackwood's voice now carried a different quality, resonant with power that seemed to vibrate in Elizabeth's bones. "For too long, humanity has been separated from its true masters. Tonight, we correct that historical error." As he spoke, black-robed figures emerged from recesses around the chamber's perimeter, 23 of them, each taking position behind one of the child-sized sarcophagi. With synchronized precision, they removed the lids, revealing the bodies of children preserved through some unknown method, their skin bearing symbols painted in a substance that glistened metallically in the torchlight. Elizabeth recognized one of the children, Mary Colton, the 8-year-old daughter of her father's clerk, who had vanished while playing in her front yard during last February's new moon. Bile rose in her throat as the full horror of Blackwood's work became clear. "You monster!" The cry came from Mrs. Colton, who had pushed forward to see her daughter's body. "You've murdered our children." Blackwood regarded her with a mild irritation one might show a servant who had interrupted a dinner conversation. "Not murdered, Mrs. Colton. Elevated. Your daughter and these other chosen vessels will serve as conduits for entities that existed before mankind crawled from the primordial ooze. Their consciousnesses have been prepared over months to house the returning overseers." Panic erupted among the guests, some rushing toward Blackwood in rage, others desperately searching for alternative exits from the sealed chamber. But the robed figures moved with inhuman speed, herding the society members back into a circle surrounding the central pit. "The children's bodies have been specially prepared," Blackwood continued, seemingly unperturbed by the chaos. "Their blood replaced with a solution of mercury and certain other elements, their organs preserved with techniques perfected in Egypt but forgotten by your modern science. They are perfect vessels now, empty of their original inhabitants but structurally intact." Elizabeth felt a cold clarity descending over her thoughts as she assessed their situation. The chamber had no visible exits beyond the sealed staircase. The robed figures, while not numerous, moved with coordinated precision that suggested extensive training or something beyond human capacity. And Blackwood himself emanated a confidence that bordered on madness, or perhaps reflected a certainty based on knowledge the rest couldn't comprehend. "The ritual requires witnesses," Blackwood explained, now sounding like a museum docent describing an exhibit. "Consciousness of a certain complexity. Your presence completes the circuit, you might say." He raised his arms, and the robed figures began a low chant in a language that seemed to pain the ear, consonants that clicked and vowels that stretched beyond normal human vocal capacity. As the chant intensified, the air above the central pit began to shimmer, like heat rising from summer pavement. But rather than mere distortion, the shimmer began to coalesce into geometric patterns, lines and angles that seemed to violate the principles of Euclidean geometry. For millennia, they have waited to return, Blackwood intoned. Pushed from this dimension when the cosmic alignment shifted, they left servants, my ancestors among them, to prepare for their re-emergence when the stars returned to their proper configuration. The geometric patterns grew more complex, forming what appeared to be a tunnel or portal suspended above the pit. From within this impossibility, Elizabeth perceived movement, shapes approaching that her mind couldn't properly process. "Father," she whispered, finding the judge pale and trembling beside her. "Whatever happens next, stay close to me." To her surprise, her father nodded, his judicial confidence shattered by the incomprehensible scene unfolding before them. For the first time since her childhood, he looked to her for guidance rather than the reverse. Elizabeth's mind raced, recalling fragments of knowledge gleaned from books her mother had left her, texts on Cherokee beliefs about Lookout Mountain and its caves, journals from Spanish explorers who had encountered phenomena they attributed to demons, and more recent geological surveys that mentioned unusual magnetic properties in the specific region of Tennessee. One detail surfaced from her reading: the Cherokee had considered this mountain a boundary place, where the membrane between worlds was thinnest. But they had also developed methods to strengthen that membrane when necessary. The chanting reached a crescendo as the first of the entities began to emerge from the portal, a limb or appendage that resembled a jointed insect leg but scaled to enormous size. The temperature in the chamber plummeted further, ice forming on the walls and floor. Elizabeth knew they had seconds, not minutes, before whatever lay beyond the portal would fully emerge. Acting on instinct and half-remembered knowledge, she broke from her father's side and lunged toward the nearest child sarcophagus. The robed figure stationed there moved to intercept her, but years of horseback riding had given Elizabeth strength that her fashionable dress concealed. She struck the figure with her shoulder, knocking them aside long enough to reach the preserved body of a child. Up close, the horror was even greater. The child's skin had been tattooed with symbols similar to those on the floor, and where the eyes should have been were polished discs of some black stone. Elizabeth grasped one of these stones and wrenched it free, ignoring the wailing shriek that emanated not from the child's body but from the portal itself. "The boundary stones," she shouted to the panicked crowd. "Take them from the children's eyes. It's what they're using to hold the portal open." Whether through understanding or desperate hope for any action, several guests followed her example, rushing to the sarcophagi and removing the black stones despite the robed figure's attempts to stop them. Each stone removed caused the portal to fluctuate, its geometric precision degrading. The entities attempting to emerge seemed to struggle, their enormous limbs moving as if through increasingly viscous material. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "Stop them!" he commanded the robed figures, his voice now layered with tones that no human vocal cords should produce. "The alignment lasts only minutes." But the society members, given purpose in their terror, outnumbered the robed guardians. Stone after stone was wrenched free, and with each removal, the portal constricted further. Elizabeth, still holding the first stone she had taken, locked eyes with Blackwood across the chamber. In that moment, she understood what he truly was, not merely a human servant to alien entities, but something that had ceased being human long ago. "Your family has failed for centuries," she called to him, her voice steady despite her terror. "And you'll fail tonight as well." Blackwood's handsome façade seemed to slip, revealing briefly a face much older and configured differently than human features should allow. "You have no idea what you're preventing," he snarled. "They would have elevated humanity beyond your comprehension." "They would have consumed us," Elizabeth countered. "The Cherokee knew. That's why they protected this place until your kind slaughtered them." As the final boundary stones were removed, the portal collapsed in on itself with a sound like reality tearing. The backlash of energy threw everyone to the ground and extinguished the torches, plunging the chamber into total darkness. In that darkness, Elizabeth heard movement, not the confused stumbling of the guests, but the deliberate motion of something large navigating without need for light. Blackwood, or whatever he had become, was moving toward her. Her hand closed around the boundary stone she had taken, its surface now burning cold against her palm. Acting on pure instinct, she raised it before her just as a hand with too many joints closed around her throat. The stone touched Blackwood's skin, and the resulting reaction defied description, a sound beyond hearing, a light beyond seeing. Elizabeth felt rather than perceived Blackwood's form collapsing, folding in on itself like paper being compacted into an impossibly small space. When it ended, nothing remained where he had stood. Light gradually returned to the chamber, though no visible source explained its origin. The robed figures lay motionless on the floor, their bodies shriveled as if mummified instantly. Of Blackwood, there was no trace. The society members huddled together, their finery soiled and torn, their worldview shattered beyond repair. The staircase had reappeared, offering escape back to the world they understood. "What do we do now?" Judge Montgomery asked his daughter, his voice uncharacteristically small. Elizabeth looked around at the chamber, the empty sarcophagi, the pit that now appeared to be nothing more extraordinary than a perfectly circular shaft cut into the mountain's heart. "We return these children to their families for proper burial," she said, her voice finding strength in practical necessity. "We seal this place so thoroughly that it can never be found again. And then we make sure everyone forgets what happened here tonight." "Forgets?" her father echoed. "How could anyone forget this horror?" "People forget what they need to forget, father," Elizabeth replied. "And the rest of us will help them do so." In the weeks that followed, the official story emerged through carefully planted newspaper accounts. Thomas Blackwood, driven mad by the financial pressures of his overambitious mansion, had murdered the missing children and concealed their bodies in a cave beneath his home. Overcome with remorse, he had confessed his crimes to the assembled guests at his gala before taking his own life in front of them. The specific details of how he died remained deliberately vague. Ravencrest Manor was sealed, its lower levels filled with concrete at Judge Montgomery's direction. The families of the murdered children received generous anonymous donations that many suspected came from the judge himself, along with the return of their children's remains for proper Christian burial. The members of Chattanooga society who had witnessed the events in the chamber beneath Ravencrest developed a curious collective aphasia regarding specific details. They remembered a tragedy, a madman, a confession, but the portal, the entities, the true nature of Blackwood himself faded from their conscious recollection, replaced by a narrative their minds could accommodate. Only Elizabeth retained complete memory of that night, along with the boundary stone she had taken from the child's eye socket. She kept it locked in a lead box, wrapped in a cloth inscribed with Cherokee symbols provided by a medicine woman she sought out in the mountains of North Carolina. 5 years later, when her father died of what doctors called heart failure, but what Elizabeth recognized as the delayed effect of exposure to whatever had emerged partially from the portal, she inherited his considerable estate. Using these resources, she established the Montgomery Historical Society, ostensibly dedicated to preserving Chattanooga's heritage. Its true purpose, known only to Elizabeth, was to monitor Lookout Mountain and similar locations throughout the American Southeast where boundaries between worlds might grow thin. She recruited others who had encountered the unexplainable, building a network of watchers who recognized the signs of incursion from elsewhere. Elizabeth never married, dedicating her life instead to ensuring that what nearly happened at Ravencrest would not be attempted again. She documented her knowledge in journals written in a cipher of her own creation, to be passed to chosen successors upon her death. When she died in 1956 at the age of 84, respected as an eccentric but generous Chattanooga philanthropist, few suspected that she had spent her life as the primary guardian against forces that would have ended humanity as we understand it. Ravencrest Manor still stands on Lookout Mountain, though it has passed through many owners since that night in 1891. None have stayed longer than 7 years, all reporting disturbances that real estate agents dismiss as settling noises typical in historic homes. In 2018, during renovation work on the mansion's east wing, workers discovered a sealed room containing a single journal page written in Elizabeth Montgomery's distinctive cipher. The current owner donated it to the Montgomery Historical Society without attempting to decode it. Society archivists, trained in Elizabeth's methods, translated the message, "They search still for another way in. The stars align again in 2023. Watch the mountain." Geological surveys conducted in 2020 revealed unusual seismic activity beneath Lookout Mountain, centered approximately 300 feet below Ravencrest's foundation, far deeper than any known part of the mansion should extend. The U.S. Geological Survey attributed these readings to natural cave formations and the settling of rock strata. But visitors to the mountain increasingly report strange dreams, temporal distortions where minutes seem to stretch into hours, and the occasional glimpse of figures with too many joints moving among the trees at twilight. The Montgomery Historical Society continues its work, its members recognizable only by the small pin they wear, a design that appears to be a stylized mountain but, when examined closely, forms a symbol meaning boundary in Cherokee. If you visit Chattanooga and happen to see someone wearing such a pin, watching the mountain with unusual intensity, you might consider that some boundaries are best left undisturbed, and some histories are intentionally forgotten for the safety of us all. What do you think happened to the entities that almost came through the portal? Are they still trying to find a way into our world? Share your theories in the comments below, and if you've ever experienced unexplainable events at historic sites, tell us your story. Don't forget to subscribe for more hidden histories from America's dark past, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. Until next time, remember, some secrets are buried for a reason.